It's another big day, though, on Capitol Hill, as two new key witnesses testify before lawmakers on both sides of the aisle in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Right now, State Department Special Advisor for Ukraine, Catherine Croft, is appearing under subpoena before congressional investigators to discuss what she knows about that infamous July 25th phone call.
Now, part of her opening statement, reading in part, quote, "The focus of the call, as I understood it, was to schedule a face-to-face meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky. We hoped that such a meeting would help undo President Trump's long-held view of Ukraine as a corrupt country." Meanwhile, in less than 1 hour, former special advisor to Ambassador Kurt Volker, Chris Anderson, will be testifying as well. Now, part of his opening statement, reading in part, quote, "I want to reiterate that my colleagues and I in the Foreign Service are nonpartisan and advance the foreign policy set by our duly elected leaders. I take that commitment as well as my oath to defend the Constitution seriously." These depositions coming just 24 hours after that explosive testimony from NSC official Alexander Vindman, who claims that the White House memo detailing the phone call between Trump and Zelensky wasn't so accurate after all.
Joining us now, Politico's senior Washington correspondent, Anna Palmer. Anna, first, what are we expecting lawmakers to get from Croft and Anderson today? What roles do they play in this inquiry?
Yeah, what it appears to be is a lot of corroborating stories of making sure what some of these other testimony has come forward that is actually true. I think the other thing that was very interesting around Catherine Croft is she inserted a Republican figure that, for those of us in Washington, have known for a long time, Bob Livingston. He was a former member of Congress and one time thought to be the next Speaker of the House during the Clinton impeachment trial. But he actually called Catherine Croft several times trying to get then Ukraine Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch fired, calling her an Obama holdover, and also saying that she was somehow tied to George Soros. Neither of those things are actually true. But it's an interesting thing, and lawmakers will want to get to the bottom of that. It would not surprise me if they might call in Bob Livingston himself to testify about who he was working for and what the motives were behind that. Chris Anderson also expected to shed some new light on John Bolton and how he viewed Rudy Giuliani as being a real obstacle to progress in the U.S.-Ukraine relationship.
Tomorrow, we are expecting to hear from Tim Morrison. Now, he was a key figure in Bill Taylor's testimony. If he shows up, because one never knows, what might we expect from him? He was the former National Security Council Director for Europe and Russia since in this year.
Yeah, we never really quite know what we're going to get from these career officials until their testimony, particularly their opening statements, leak out. So it's hard to predict. I do think one of the things that we're hearing from each of these career officials is the kind of pushing back on Donald Trump's kind of allegations that this is the deep state coming after them. I think you start to see a real picture of serious career officials who have been working on behalf of the U.S. for years, if not decades.
All right, Anna, thank you so much. Let's turn now to Tuesday's explosive testimony on Capitol Hill. NBC News has confirmed Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, the top Ukraine expert on National Security Council, told members of Congress that he tried to edit that White House memo detailing the July 25th phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky to include details that were omitted. This is a direct contrast from what we have heard from President Trump repeatedly regarding that very same transcript of the call.
They tried to take that conversation and make it into a big scandal. The problem was we had it transcribed. It was an exact transcription of the conversation. I released a transcript of my conversation, an exact transcript.
They didn't know that I had a transcript done by very, very talented people, word for word, comma for comma, done by people that do it for a living. We had an exact transcript.
Joining us now, NBC's Jonathan Allen. He's been covering the Alexander Vindman testimony. First, quickly, how long did he testify for?
It seems like all day and all night. It was many hours yesterday, Stephanie. I didn't have a clock on it myself, but I know that after several hours, I talked to Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey, and he said that many of the things that the members of Congress have been looking for had already been corroborated, and they'd only just begun. That was early afternoon yesterday, after, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours.
Let's bring us up to speed on what we learned from Vindman's explosive testimony, how it related to what Donald Trump calls a transcript. What we've been saying since day one isn't actually a transcript. It's a memorialization of the phone call that had ellipses and things that looked like they were missing. The guidance on that transcript indicated that the ellipses may have been pauses, but in fact, according to Vindman, things were actually missing from that memo.
That's right. I spoke to a lawmaker who was present yesterday, another source who was familiar with the testimony, who said that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified that he tried to get put back into that summary of the phone call a couple of key points. One was that President Trump, according to Vindman, was trying to get the Ukrainian President Zelensky to produce some sort of recordings, supposed recordings of Vice President Biden talking about Ukrainian corruption, and also President Zelensky of Ukraine talking about Burisma, the company on whose board Hunter Biden once sat, specifically talking about that company. Of course, those are two huge key points in this impeachment inquiry, the extent to which there may have been a quid pro quo involving the president's desire to get an investigation into the Bidens.
So I just want to share what we have next to us. It's important because the president said it was a perfect call. It was a word-for-word transcript right here at the bottom of it. Caution, a memorandum of a telephone conversation is not a verbatim transcript of a discussion. It is a summary. What does this do, Jonathan, to the Republican Party defense? A, that all of the testimony thus far has been hearsay since Vindman was on the call, and B, this big push to unmask the whistleblower. Is the unmasking less important today now that more and more people testifying are corroborating the content of the complaint?
Well, number one, Stephanie, you're no longer dealing with the question of hearsay. You're now dealing with people who are giving direct testimony, people who are direct witnesses to this phone call. Vindman's not the only one. We're getting more and more witnesses who were parties to this phone call who can corroborate, or in some cases they may reject what some of the other witnesses are saying. So far, we've only heard from people who are in the room that there's been corroboration on the key parts of this summary of the phone call, and of course some omissions of this phone call. So that's one big point that we're hearing here, and so that hearsay question is completely exploded, and the idea that this was a transcript has been exploded as well. We know that it's not a direct transcript.
But it's important to say that because the president continues to refer to it as a full and complete transcript with no omissions in it. John, good to see you.
That's why, can I just ask you, I don't understand why the president and Republicans have been saying, why are you making this testimony over and over private? Let's see it in public.
Right.
If it were to be in public, you would hear from what by Friday will be 14 people,
who
not just talking about this one phone call, talking about other phone calls, other meetings, other messaging from a Mike Pence, a Rick Perry, a Donald Sondland, to aides from Zelensky. How does that help them?
Right. I think it's just a talking point on process to keep everybody busy.
Except now the president says, let's not talk about process, let's talk about content.
Is more important.
Let's talk content.
All right, in about 2 hours, the House Rules Committee is expected to vote on its resolution, which details the next steps in the impeachment inquiry. This, as NBC News confirms, that House Democrats are taking a closer look at the ABCs of impeachment to make their case against President Trump. And if you don't know about the ABCs of impeachment, here they are. A, abuse of power. B, betrayal. C, corruption.
Joining us now on Capitol Hill, the reporter who broke this really important piece, definitely helps you understand it a whole lot more, our friend Heidi Przybyla. Walk us through these ABCs.
Right, Steph. So when I spoke with Democrats close to this investigation last night, they said that we already have so much information that's in the public sphere, including 5 witnesses now saying that there was a quid pro quo, including the president's acting chief of staff, that you can start to talk about how they're going to hew this to what the founders laid out as the conditions for impeachment. These are the ABCs. A, abuse of power. That would be relative to the president's attempts to use his office, to abuse his office for his own personal gain in order to gain this dirt on the Bidens. B is for betrayal of the country and betrayal of our national security interests in terms of pushing an ally into a very precarious situation with Ukraine and not letting them fully defend themselves if we're going to withhold aid. And C is for corruption, and that is corrupting our electoral process by encouraging openly, including on camera, in front of all of us, foreign powers to get involved and meddle in our election process.
Meanwhile, the president is employing the Glengarry Glen Ross ABC of always be closing this inquiry down. That was clever. You got that.
I got that.
Okay.
I got that. Heidi, to Stephanie's point just before this conversation, the White House and its defenders in Congress, including Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise and others, continue to be highly focused on process questions, most of which will sort of sort themselves out, because if you don't like private testimony, public testimony will come shortly hereafter. The issue is that they are trying to paint a picture of what they call a witch hunt or a procedural effort to get rid of the president, and largely ignoring the content of the issues, the ABC. How do Democrats hope that this message, their message, gets out to the American public?
Well, when this goes to a public portion, what they're going to do is take the best aspects of the testimony that they've heard from all of these officials and take those public. And what I think you're going to see in this final phase of the closed door testimony, guys, is that there's a chance here that some of the loudest voices, for instance, Morrison, who is from the NSC, who is on the phone call, who's going to testify on Thursday, have the potential to be the most explosive, because here you're not even talking about career diplomats anymore. You are talking about the president's political appointees in the inner sanctum of his foreign policy making circles. So the problem that they have, though, with Republicans right now, and this is even with moderate Republicans who I talk to, Steph, is that they feel that the process is unfair because it is closed. They feel that the process is unfair because when it goes open and Adam Schiff is still in charge of the process,
but
that
Heidi,
the president is not going to have he's not going to have his counsel there representing him. Now, let me just tell you,
the same process Ken Starr used?
It was the same process. And so that is what I was going to follow up with, is that Ken Starr drew up his report. And in this case, Adam Schiff would be like Ken Starr drawing up a report, right? And then presenting it to the judiciary. But the Republicans who I talk to, and they really are livid here, say that Adam Schiff is not Ken Starr and that we don't have a special prosecutor in this case. However, the rules of engagement are very similar. It's just that you plug in different actors in this case where there could be multiple Ken Starrs. Maybe it's not Adam Schiff who actually presents the information to judiciary, although it's highly likely. There could be other committee chairmen who are involved as well. But yes, the bottom line is it is very similar in that the president's counsel at that point, when this process goes to the judiciary, which will have its own open hearings, the president's counsel at that point will have a lot of rights, including to call witnesses and to push back and to question the witnesses. And that is what the Democrats say is a fair process, because under the Constitution, the House's role here is really to draw up these charges. It's not to hold a trial. The Senate's job is to hold a trial. So we probably will see these closed hearings drag out a little bit longer, and then open hearings pushing possibly even past the Democrats' original self-imposed date of Thanksgiving.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.